Hello, my name is Johanna Petzold and I'm a musicologist, and I've been working with MED-EL since 2012. I'm based in the United States and I'm focusing on the topic music as it relates to research, rehabilitation, and education and awareness. So today my presentation is titled Music and Cochlear Implants: An Introduction. So let's just start with music. What comes to your mind when you think about music, when you hear the word music? Maybe you think about listening to music, live concerts, either in a one way or the other. Maybe you think about dancing. Maybe you think about music enjoyment. So let me ask you this: music enjoyment. What rating would you give music enjoyment on a scale from 1 to 10? I would definitely give it a 10. Music enjoyment, the power of music. So why does music have such a power? Let's think about how important music is in our society. It's an essential part of life. It's part of society in every civilization. It's omnipresent and daily. Just think about it, about the availability, how music is accessible. Pretty much you can access music everywhere and at any time. You can listen to music at home, you can listen to music at work, you can listen to music in the car. Wherever you go, you can take an iPod or another listening device and listen to music everywhere at any time. Music also is such a supporter and a personal gain. It's a great experience and enjoyment, and it has this direct access to our emotions, and that's what it makes it so powerful. And it's just natural that people with hearing loss in general and people with cochlear implants are now asking for music. They want music enjoyment. So we know that music can be quite a challenge for cochlear implant users or hearing impaired in general. And we know, though, that for speech we see a lot of great results. So how are music and speech different? So let's look at this graph here. What you can see is the range of frequencies related to the range of loudness in dB. And probably to most of you, you're familiar with the so-called speech banana, which represents speech in terms of frequencies and loudness. So now you can see another bubble around the speech banana, and we see what, in terms of frequency and loudness, music covers. So we see it has a much wider range of frequencies and also a wider dynamic range. So let's think about it a little differently. So music often consists of different instruments, different voices. So for example, in an orchestral piece, we have different instruments playing at the same time, maybe playing different rhythms, different melodies. So it's like several talkers speaking at the same time, and we are trying to understand everybody at the same time. So we see music is really complex, and that's why it's quite a challenge for CI users. So in the next couple slides, I would like to give you an overview what we've learned from cochlear implant and music research in the past 20 or 30 years. So let's start with the questions we have asked. And I have grouped these questions into 3 categories. So let's start with the category music perception as it relates to performance. So let's think about the questions we've asked here. So we've used different features of music, such as rhythm, pitch, and with pitch we have intervals, melody, chords, and then we also have timbre. So here in this category, the questions have been, can you differentiate? Can you recognize? Can you identify? So this is one category which has been investigated quite a lot. And then another category is what I call music appreciation. And there are different kinds of questions we have asked. And I have separated here quality ratings from quality descriptions. Because let's think about the question we can ask. We can ask about quality in a way like, how pleasant is it to you? How natural? These two questions are probably the most asked questions in the category of music appreciation. But we also try to understand how cochlear implant users would describe certain stimuli. So we've asked, how tinny does it sound? How reverberant? So these are rather descriptors of the quality. And then another question we have asked, which relates to music appreciation, is, can you perceive the music emotions? Like how happy are you? Can you receive the happiness in the music or the sadness, so that you can connect through the emotions with the music? The third category lined out here is again music perception, but asking about the neuromechanisms. And here we have used objective measurements such as EEG to understand how the brain processes this stimuli we receive through a cochlear implant. So these are the three categories which were most present, which have been mainly asked in the past 20 to 30 years. So the questions I've just lined out to you are kind of the task we have given. Then like a task or a method. So then we also have like the underlying objective. Usually we are interested in understanding how A compares to B. So for example, we have investigated how cochlear implant users perform compared to normal hearing individuals or to hearing aid users. Another category is we are trying to understand how children with cochlear implants perform versus adults, or maybe beyond that, older adults. So most of the time we are trying here to understand how our prelingually deaf individuals perform versus postlingual individuals. And then another category is to understand how indications compare to each other. We have unilateral cochlear implant users, bilateral, bimodal, EAS users with the residual hearing in the low frequencies, and we do have single-site deafness users. And then of course there's a big interest in understanding the technology, understanding new coding strategies or electrodes and what benefit they may bring to music performance. So now let's look at some results. Really what I want to show to you are the main learnings out of this past 20 to 30 years. So let's start with music perception. Remember the first category. So here they've used behavioral measures to understand such music features as rhythm or pitch and timbre. And what we've learned for rhythm is that CI users perform similarly to normal hearing individuals. So now let's look at pitch and timbre. That's where it becomes challenging. So in both cases, CI users perform significantly worse to normal hearing individuals. And we've learned for pitch, where we have different subcategories such as intervals or melodies or complex harmonic structure. Basically, the more complex the task becomes, the more challenging it is for CI users. Intervals, really the average shown in the past is 3 semitones. That's what the average can differentiate. And with melodies, we have learned that generally melody contours can be perceived, but there's quite a variability. So let's look at timbre. Again, CI users perform significantly poorer than normal hearing individuals. And what's interesting here is that, of course, when we grow up as normal hearing individuals, we learn different instruments. And sometimes maybe we don't know all the instruments which are part of an orchestra. But usually when we, for example, hear, let's say, the viola, maybe some of you cannot really easily differentiate it to a violin, but you know it's part of the string family. So in research, we have found that cochlear implant users also confuse very often instrument families. So let me now point out really one key learning from this research in music performance through behavioral measures. So on this slide, you see basically 3 different studies. So one study from Brockmeyer from 2011, one study from Chen from 2013, and from one study from Kang from 2009. And they all use different music test batteries, but usually these music test batteries ask relatively the same question using different features of music, which I've already introduced. And what we can see here are some results. So for example, the Brockmeyer study, we see the average, the mean for rhythm discrimination is 78.8%, so relatively good. And then we see other tests such as identification of musical styles, and we see the more such features as pitch and timbre are involved, the score drops. So for example, recognition of musical pieces, quite a complex task. The mean is 37.95%. And so on. In the study from Kang, we see, for example, instrument identification, so timbre identification. The mean is 45.3%. But now the interesting part. Let's look at the range. Let's start again with the rhythm discrimination. So the mean was 78%, but now we can see the range is 40 to 100. Let's look at the Chen study, the recognition of musical pieces. The mean was 37%. The range is 6 to 90%. What a range! So we can see that although the overall mean is relatively low, there are still people who perform quite well. And this learning opened up another list of questions. How can it be that there is such a variability among CI users? Like, what do the people who do perform well have, what the others don't? What are the factors which influence such results? And, well, we are still investigating these questions. But I will come back to one factor we have found in a little bit. Now let's move on to the category music appreciation. So remember, I talked about quality ratings, about pleasantness, naturalness. Often part of this is also liking, preferences. So it's very interesting. Like, I've read a lot of literature over the years, and what we can see here is that pleasantness ratings have increased over time. So in a study from Brockmeyer in 2007, we had about 66% who rated music to be pleasant. And in a later study from Müller, we have 91%. So the question here is, of course, what's the difference? And I will come back to the study from Müller and show you what makes it different. Another interesting learning when we think about the indications is that bilateral users give much higher ratings, for example, for naturalness, than unilateral users. In fact, in a study from Wigman, you can see here in the graph how big of a difference these users give, bilateral versus unilateral. We see much higher scores for the bilateral users. So this is an important learning. Music enjoyment changes quite drastically when a CI user receives a second implant. Now let's talk about liking. So, for example, in a study from Gefeller, she investigated what CI users like better than others. And a general learning here is that what is more simple in structure is liked better than a very complex music piece. So let's say maybe your patients like classical music. Well, maybe it's not such a good start to start with a symphony, but maybe a trio would be something more simple to listen to. All right, remember I said I would point out one of these factors which have a great impact on the CI users which do much better with music. And what we've found is that music training and music experience make a big difference. So, for example, musical experience before hearing loss was found to be a very strong predictor for outcomes, not just for music, but also for speech-relevant tasks. So music experience since the CI was also found to be a predictor, especially when it comes to more complex tasks. And then we found that generally music enjoyment was positively correlated with time spent listening to music after implantation. So let me give you a recommendation. Try to encourage your CI patients to listen to music. So with this graph, I would like to demonstrate to you how important triformance is for music. I'm sure you've already learned about triformance and what are the parts. So here in this graph, on the very bottom, you see the range of frequencies. Then above of it, you see the piano. So I'm a musician and I often talk about C4 and A5, but I work a lot with engineers and they use frequencies. So in this graph, I've used both. So whatever you can relate to, you can see it here in the graph. And then you have a variety of instruments and their range. And for your information, the pitch range here in this graph really stands for the actual tone the instrument plays, so the fundamental frequency. The harmonics are not represented in that range. So, as you know, historically, cochlear implants were developed for speech. So, and that's why commonly the frequency range started at around 250 Hertz. So that's where about C4 is. So you see all this low frequency, what's important for music, is not represented. You see all this here is not part. Now, Medel has extended this frequency range down to 70 Hertz. But we didn't just simply extend the frequency range. We did that in a very natural way. So with complete cochlear coverage, you have the right place where the pitch is represented. And then with structure preservation, you preserve the structure in a way that every little bit can help to decode such a complex signal such as music. And then we have fine hearing, which gives this additional temporal information in the low frequencies, there where it's important. So now, for Medell, it is very important to give access to music. And I would like now to show you two studies which are evidence for how Medell patients do. So here in a study from Müller et al., the one I've mentioned in an earlier slide, they were interested to investigate the effect of fine hearing. So what they did is comparing two coding strategies, FSP, so the one who has fine hearing, compared to HDCIS, which is an envelope-only coding strategy. And here for the study, we have a very nice N of 46 participants. And now let's look at the results. And I have, for this purpose of this presentation, focused on the music-relevant results only. So the patients were asked how they would rate music in terms of pleasantness and naturalness. And here are the results referring to FSP, so where fine hearing is used. And we can see that 91% of users rated that music sounds pleasant with the cochlear implant. Remember when I earlier compared these two studies, where an earlier study only found 61%. In that study, only envelope-only coding strategies were used. So part of this increase of pleasantness is triformance, is the right place of pitch, is the fine hearing, and structure preservation. And beyond this main finding, we've also found that 84% of users reported that they listen to music at least once a week, if not every day. So it seems like they are much earlier motivated and stay motivated to listen to music. So they get the experience, which also contributes to improvements. Now let's look at this graph. So here again, we can, this is just another representation of the results for FSP compared to HDCIS, and we can see that 67% reported that music sounds more natural with FSP. We have a lot of better and much better ratings here. We also found that 64% reported that music sounds fuller and more resonant with FSP, and that's really something essential when it comes to music. Okay, so here I have another study from Charles Lim et al. Again, the objective is to compare FSP, which provides fine hearing, with HDCIS, which is an envelope-only coding strategy. And they try to really understand the music sound quality discrimination abilities. And they had an N of 8. So with this graph, let me explain what method they used. So they used the CAI Mushra, and here you can see they used a rating scale from 0 to 100 to rate sound quality. And then they've used music samples from 5 different genres, and they had a reference. And then in the stimuli which were provided, they had a hidden reference and then various manipulations of the original. And what they did was they cut off low frequency. So, for example, here you can see everything below 200 Hertz was cut away. And here everything below 400 Hertz was cut off. And here everything below 600 Hertz. So more and more low frequency is missing. And now let's look at here the results, which are the results from the normal hearing listeners, which they compared the CI users to. And you can see that the more low frequency is missing, the worse get the results. So for this study, Charles Lim and his group, they considered the normal hearing results as the gold standard, meaning that the closer the ratings by the CI users would be to the normal hearing listeners, the more normal the music sound quality perception is considered. So now let's look at some of the results from the CI users. So here in this graph, we can now see the results for the group when they used HDCIS. And one important information I have to give here is that this is a within subject comparison. That means that the same cochlear implant users used HDCIS and gave ratings for this coding strategy, and then they used FSP and gave ratings for that as well. So it's the same person comparing HDCIS with FSP. So here, what we can see in the results compared to the normal hearing listeners is that the slope differs. Yes, we can see they give higher ratings, but that doesn't mean it's better. That means that they are not so affected by the missing low frequency, meaning that maybe they don't perceive a difference that low frequency was cut off. Now let's look at the results when the same CI users used FSP. So here in this graph, we can see that the results when the CI users used FSP, they are much closer to the normal hearing listeners. And that means that the sensitivity to high-pass filtering is more similar to normal hearing controls for the FSP condition. So FSP, the fine hearing, more readily provides perceivable bass frequency cues. So to sum this presentation up, I have introduced triformans, and I just want to remind you that these are really the key features who contribute, as I've demonstrated with the studies, to music sound quality. The preserved cochlear structure, the right place pitch through complete cochlear coverage, and natural sound coding through fine hearing. And all this contributes to better music quality, to more music enjoyment, and that's what we're in for. That's what we want to provide our users. Thank you.